Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Scott Woods, and I am the Director of the Office of Minority Broadband Initiatives here at NTIA's Office of Internet Connectivity and Growth. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our 5th session of the IIJA Broadband Program's Public Virtual Listening Series. Before we get started, let's quickly review some key housekeeping items. First, the presentation, along with a transcript and recording of today's session, will be available on the Broadband USA website within 7 days under the Events/Past Events tab. Second, if at any time you experience technical difficulties with our Zoom platform, please use the chat function to send a message to our host, and we will address your issues. So let's get started. Today, we are excited to have you join us to provide input and feedback on our Digital Equity Act programs. Our collaboration and your input will be key factors in the success of this program. And we will open the microphone to hear from as many attendee participants as we can today, as we've done in past events. Your constructive feedback is critical to our next steps of designing and implementing this key program. However, given our time constraints, it may not be possible to hear from everyone who would like to speak. If we do not get to you, or if you prefer to provide written comments, please feel free to provide your input on the discussion questions today by submitting them by the chat box or by emailing them to broadbandforall@ntia.gov at any time. Again, broadbandforall@ntia.gov at any time. With that, let's go over today's agenda. First, we will provide a detailed overview of the Digital Equity Act program and today's question from 2 of my colleagues in the Office of Policy Analysis and Development. Number 1, Russ Hanser, the Director of Communications Policy Initiatives, and 2, Rafi Goldberg, a Senior Telecommunications Policy Specialist. After you hear from them, I will provide the listening session logistics before opening up the listening session, which will be moderated by one of my team members, Karen Archer-Perry, a Senior Broadband Program Specialist here at the Office of Internet Connectivity and Growth. And with that said, let's get started. Please join me in welcoming Russ Hanser and Rafi Goldberg.
Thank you so much, Scott, and thank you everyone else for having me here to speak about the Digital Equity Act programs along with my colleague, Rafi Goldberg. So these are the questions that you'll all be discussing during the listening session following the presentation. We're going to skip by these for now, but there'll be an opportunity to look at them in more depth later on. So I'll be talking about the Digital Equity Act of 2021 and some high-level issues with respect to its programs. As you all know, or many of you know, the Act defines digital equity as the condition in which individuals and communities have the information technology capacity that is needed for full participation in the society and economy of the United States. And digital inclusion is defined a little bit more broadly to refer to activities that are necessary to ensure that all individuals in the US have access to and use of affordable information and communication technologies, including access to broadband service, devices with which to use the service, access to applications, and so on. And digital inclusion includes obtaining access to digital literacy training, the provision of technical support, and obtaining basic awareness of measures to ensure online privacy and cybersecurity. So quite broad here. So the Digital Equity Act creates 3 sequence programs to promote digital inclusion. Collectively, these are $2.75 billion worth of programs, and their overall objective is to support the closure of the digital divide and promote equity and digital inclusion such that individuals and communities have information technology capacity needed for full participation in the society and economy of the United States. So the first two programs are really two halves of one whole program implemented by the states. Those are the state planning grant program for $60 million, and then the state capacity grant program, which is about 1.44 billion, or exactly $1.44 billion. And then we have the competitive program a little bit later on. That's going to be a competitive grant program, which will distribute about $1.25 billion. That will be created once the state implementation grants begin getting awarded. So a little bit down the road from here. So to provide first an overview of the funding pool, the program types, and the objectives. So first we have the State Digital Equity Planning Program. That is a funding pool of $60 million. It's a state and territory formula grant program. And the objective there is to promote achievement of digital equity, support digital inclusion activities, and build capacity for efforts by states relating to the adoption of broadband by residents of those states. This is the first phase of the state programs. And it's sort of the state's opportunity to create the plan by which it's going to effectuate the second phase, and that is the Digital Equity Capacity Grant Program. So that's where we come into the $1.44 billion. That also a state and territory formula program. It's the same formula applied to different amounts of money in the same provision of the Act. And the objective there is to support, again, implementation of the state digital equity plans and digital inclusion activities. Although these monies are set to go to states, there's a set aside for Indian tribes, Alaskan Native entities, Native Hawaiian organizations, and then another set aside for U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam, America Samoa, and the CNMI, and any other territory or possession that is not a state. So although territories are not included in the sort of the main definition of states with respect to these programs, they are included in these set asides and can get money to pursue these activities that way. So I mentioned the breadth of the definitions, also broad the categories of individuals that the Digital Equity Act is aimed at helping. So the programs and priorities, the priorities of the programs include individuals living in low-income households, households earning at or below 150% of the poverty level, individuals who are members of racial or ethnic minority groups, individuals in rural areas, individuals facing language barriers, the aging, individuals with disabilities, incarcerated individuals, and veterans. These are not rankings. These are just the age groups that are accounted for by the Digital Equity Act and that need to be accounted for in state plans and state programs. So as I mentioned, the two state programs are really halves of a whole. They're two distinct streams, and it's really important. We always want to emphasize state has to complete the first phase, the State Digital Equity Planning Program, in order to get money under the capacity program, which is that $1.44 billion. So need to participate in the first grant. So first thing that will happen is a NOFO will be released a little bit later this year on this program. Next thing that will happen is the eligible entities will decide if they want to participate. And if so, we'll need to submit an application. You'll hear a little bit more about that later. NTIA will review the applications, and then the eligible entities will work on developing plans using the money that they get from the program. Then again, for entities that have completed that part of the program, we've got the capacity grant program. There'll be a separate NOFO, notice of funding opportunity, issued with respect to the capacity grant program. That'll be a little bit later on. Then there'll be applications filed by eligible entities who had completed the planning grant program. NTIA again will review and approve applications for how eligible entities want to use the state capacity money. And the money is awarded annually over 5 years based on each year's appropriation. And then in the last stage, eligible entities use the money themselves or subgrant the money to entities that are listed in the statute, and you'll hear a bit more about, and to pursue essentially the digital equity plans that they've created during the first phase of the process. So eligible costs in the state programs, you've got, again, the two pieces. So during the planning phase of the process, grants can only be used for a couple of purposes. They can be used to develop the state digital equity plan or to award subgrants to other entities listed in the statute to assist in the development of the state equity plan, digital equity plan. So again, first phase, fully focused on developing that plan. And then the second phase is aimed at implementing that plan. So funds awarded under that program can still only be used for limited purposes, but they're less limited. So there's some money that can be used to update or maintain the digital equity plan. Money generally is going to be used to implement the plan. Again, the eligible entity, typically a state, can award subgrants to entities listed in the statute to assist in implementing the plan, to pursue digital inclusion activities, to report back to the state on success or the progress of the digital inclusion activities. There's also some money that can be used to determine the efficacy of those above efforts. So states can course correct over time if certain efforts are not successful. And then to cover certain administrative costs in carrying out these programs. We recognize, well, the statute recognizes, I should say, that states are going to incur administrative costs just like we do here at NTIA. But thank you again for having me. Take care.
Thank you, Russ. So how does the state participate in the Digital Equity Act programs? Well, the first step is that the governor or the equivalent official in each state needs to select an administering entity to develop the state digital equity plan and ultimately to administer the capacity grants that will be used to implement that plan. The statute lays out a range of different entities that may be selected. It includes the state itself, certain state agencies, tribal governments, community anchor institutions, certain nonprofit foundations, and others that you can find on the list on the left side of this slide. When selecting an administering entity, it will be important to keep in mind the responsibilities that it will need to undertake on behalf of the state. We've listed those on the right side of the slide. The administering entity will receive and administer grant awards, develop and implement the state digital equity plan, make subgrants as needed, and generally serve as an advocate for digital equity in the state. Speaking of responsibilities, a state should also bear in mind the assurances it will have to make when applying for grants under this program. That includes using grant funds in a fashion that is consistent with the statute and any applicable regulations, correcting deficiencies if they do happen, and cooperating in future program evaluation efforts by NTIA. Among other things, the administering entity will need to use proper accounting and fiscal control procedures, maintain good records, and make any changes to the digital equity plan available for public comments. And finally, before submitting the state digital equity plan for approval by the Assistant Secretary, the state will need to ensure that it has complied with all the relevant requirements. Importantly, that includes engaging with a range of community groups and other stakeholders and accepting and responding to public comment on draft state digital equity plans. With all that in mind, let's talk about how a state actually applies for the initial planning grant. Interested states will need to submit an application within 60 days of when the NTIA publishes the NOFO or Notice of Funding Opportunity. The statute specifies just a few things that need to be included with the application. States will need to name and describe the selected administrative entity. They will need to certify that they will develop and submit a state digital equity plan that meets all of the requirements within a year of receiving the funds. And they will need to make all the assurances that were outlined in the previous slide. And just a quick note that generally speaking, states will be expected to extend their planning grant funds within 1 year of receiving them, though there is an option for the Assistant Secretary to extend that deadline, though importantly, not the deadline to actually submit the plan, just the deadline to expend the funds. So once states receive their planning grants, they need to begin developing their state digital equity plans. The statute outlines several different buckets of requirements for what needs to be in those plans. First, states will have to identify the barriers to digital equity that are faced by the members of covered populations in their state. That includes each of the 8 different groups that Russ outlined a little bit earlier. Second, the plan should specify measurable objectives for documenting and promoting a host of digital equity related goals among each category of covered population. That includes not just basic broadband adoption, but also digital skills development, making public services more accessible online, making affordable computing devices available with appropriate technical support, and even promoting privacy and cybersecurity awareness. Each plan should also include an assessment of how the digital equity plan goals are going to interact with other state plans, such as workforce development and educational outcome plans. The state digital equity plan also needs to describe how the state plans to continue to collaborate with a range of stakeholders in implementation. And you'll see here a pretty long list of examples that's been pulled from the statute. This collaboration and inclusion is really a recurring theme of the Digital Equity Act. So it will be important to engage with a wide range of community groups, local and tribal governments, nonprofits, civil rights organizations, and many others. And finally, and in keeping with that same sort of theme, states will need to include in each plan a list of organizations with which the administering entity collaborated during development of the plan. Collaboration and engagement with these groups needs to happen both during development of the digital equity plan, and there needs to be a plan to continue that engagement when the plan is being implemented. So as Russ mentioned earlier, the Digital Equity Act program is set up to roll out in stages. Once a state has an approved state digital equity plan, it will become eligible to apply for capacity grant funds to actually implement the plan. And these funds will be available on an annual basis. There is an appropriation for each of the next several fiscal years. And as you'll see, distribution of the capacity grants needs to begin no later than 2 years after the beginning of when planning grants get awarded. So it will be important to finish the state digital equity plan on time, not just to satisfy the requirements of that grant, but also to become eligible to start applying for capacity grant funds. The capacity grants can be used both for implementation and otherwise to support digital inclusion activities in those states. And the application will also be something that's required within 60 days of a notice of funding opportunity being released. And again, that application, similar to the planning grant application, needs to include a description of the administering entity for each state, the digital equity plan itself, a certification that the state is going to implement the digital equity plan, grants in a manner that is consistent with its goals, the required assurances that previously mentioned, and if the state chooses to amend its digital equity plan, it's going to need to list what has changed there as well. Great. So how is the money distributed? So the statute specifies a funding formula to be used both for the planning grants and for the capacity grants. What is outlined in the statute is that 50% of the award to each eligible state shall be based on the population of that eligible state in proportion to this total population of all the eligible states. And by eligible states, I mean the ones that successfully applied for the grant, so they become eligible to receive the funding. Another 25% of the total grant amount is based on the number of individuals in each state who are members of the aforementioned covered populations. And that's again in proportion to the total number of people in all of the eligible states who are members of covered populations. And then finally, the last 25% of the grant shall be based on the relative lack of availability and adoption of broadband in the eligible state in proportion to the lack of availability and adoption among all of the eligible states. And the statute specifies a few different data sources that we will be required to use in making that determination, including the NTIA Internet Use Survey, the American Community Survey, and the FCC's broadband deployment reports. An important note, the amount awarded to any eligible state during a particular year cannot be less than 0.5% of the total amount made available to all of the states in that year. So there is a floor in terms of the minimum amount of money that each state can receive, and we will include more information on how the funding formula will be implemented in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. Almost everything that we've discussed so far has been about the Digital Equity Capacity Grant Program, but we do very quickly just want to give a brief overview of the Competitive Grant Program, which is a little bit further down the road in terms of how the rollout is being staged. Unlike the capacity grant, unlike the planning grant, this is, as the name implies, not formula-based, but a competitive grant. And it's not just states that are eligible to apply for these grants, political subdivisions, such as a city or county or other municipality, tribal organizations, nonprofits, community anchor institutions, educational and agencies. All of the entities listed on the right will be eligible to apply for these grants, which are also designed to promote digital inclusion and equity, rather than being based on the state's digital equity plan and sort of how the state is rolling that out. It will be open to a wider range of entities to compete for, and that will start a little bit later on once the capacity grants have been awarded. Great, and with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Scott Woods.
Thank you very much, Russ and Rafi. Now we will start the part of the program that everyone has been waiting for. That's our listening session. Before we get started, I'll go over a few logistics and then we'll get right into it. To provide verbal comments on the questions we presented, please see the instructions on your screen. If you are joining us from your computer or on the Zoom mobile app, please use the raise your hand feature to indicate you would like to speak. If you had joined via phone audio only, please be sure to dial *9 to raise your hand. When your name is called, your mic will be unmuted and you will have the opportunity to speak. Please begin by providing your name and the organization that you represent. Please note, we will limit comments to 2 minutes each, so please keep your comments brief to allow time for others to participate. During your 2-minute window, you may respond to one or more of the discussion questions presented on the screen. As a reminder, you may also provide written comments regarding today's discussion questions. You can do that by submitting them via the chat box or emailing them again directly to broadbandforall@ntia.gov. Finally, please remember that this time is for you to provide feedback on the discussion questions presented today. If you have a specific question about Digital Equity Act program or any of the other broadband programs authorized under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill, please send those directly to broadbandforall@ntia.gov, or you may submit them via the chat function to our host today. With that, please welcome Karen Archer-Perry, who will moderate today's listening session. Karen, over to you.
Thank you very much. Let me have the questions, please.
One minute, Karen, I'll get those up for you.
We have 4 questions to focus our conversation on today. And I want to make sure that you know where we want to focus the conversation. The first question is, what are the most effective digital inclusion, equity, and adoption interventions that NTIA should, have to move myself, that states should include in their digital equity plans? So again, what are the most effective digital inclusion, equity, and adoption interventions that states should include in their digital equity plans? The second question is, what types of assistance should NTIA provide to states, localities, and community groups and underrepresented populations to ensure that state digital equity plans and states' use of capacity grants fully address the equity gaps in broadband access, adoption, and use, and promote digital skills? Now, the third question relates to another one of our major grant programs. That's the BEAD program. The BEAD program is the Broadband Equity Access Deployment Grant Program. You might have heard about that grant program at one of our earlier webinars. The Broadband Equity Access Deployment Grant Program is the $42.5 billion grant program that is a formula-based grant program that will go to the states in order to address access grants in unserved and underserved areas of the country. So it's a grant program that will be distributed to states on a formula basis to address access gaps across the country. But it also does include a component not just for access, but for adoption. So with that as a background, let me now read the question number 3. NTIA believes that it is crucial for states' BEAD proposals to be as integrated as possible with their digital equity plans, and that the two work in tandem. So how should NTIA ensure that the state digital equity plans and the state BEAD program plans are integrated to address broadband access and adoption? So how do we make sure that the access plans and the equity plans are integrated and that we get the most out of, we help the states get the most out of both? And then the fourth question is, what best practices, if any, should states follow in developing measurable objectives for availability, affordability, accessibility, digital literacy, privacy, and security? So you've got an awful lot of options in terms of where you can provide comments. So as Scott mentioned, we're asking you to raise your hand, press *6 on your phone. When you are ready to speak, I will call on one person. I'll indicate who's on deck, meaning who's going to come after that person. We're asking you to keep your comments to 1 or 2 minutes because I think we're going to have a lot of commenters. Introduce yourself and indicate your organizational name. And we are really looking forward to hearing from you. I've got a couple of names teed up a little already. It looks like Nicole Umayam from Arizona State Library is first, and I think Judy Morter is second. Nicole, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Please.
Great. Well, good afternoon. My name is Nicole Umayam, and I am the Digital Inclusion Library Consultant at the Arizona State Library, Archives, and Public Records, a division of the Arizona Secretary of State. I've just celebrated my 5th year with the State Library, and each day I witness how libraries support broadband access, adoption and use, and support digital skills training. Library leaders are engaged in broadband planning and are positioned to partner with other entities to extend resources. So we need local and state coordinators who are dedicated to amplifying the work of those on the ground, building trust relationships among those organizations, and crafting a shared vision of local success. After unserved and underserved areas, the BEAD program prioritizes serving community anchor institutions with service falling below 1 gigabit speed symmetrical. In Arizona, this is approximately 1/3 of rural and tribal libraries. At the State Library, we collect data on library broadband through self-reported annual statistics, voluntary speed tests, E-rate applications, and during site visits. Hardly consistent. NTIA may assist state efforts by supporting comprehensive broadband mapping methodologies of anchor institutions, by providing guidance for collecting pricing information and comparing available speeds versus actual speeds, and by supporting initiatives that facilitate data exchange between schools, libraries, and other anchors. We need smart long-term investments in library broadband and fewer Band-Aid solutions. I've heard from libraries who are tired of applying for grant funds for temporary interventions, such as Wi-Fi hotspot lending, or for testing out innovative technologies for network resilience, such as low Earth orbit satellites and TV white space. Between the administrative cost of applying for grants and the constraint of offering a service for 1 year or less, and the ever-shrinking budgets that force libraries to lose the staff to manage these programs, many libraries are not in the position to take advantage of these funds. Libraries are critical infrastructure, and digital equity plans need to acknowledge and strategize around supporting the library workforce to build success. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Judy, you're next, and I think H. Buddy Robinson, you're on deck right after Judy.
Thank you, Karen. Good afternoon. I am Judy Morter from World Education and the current president of the National Coalition for Literacy, a national team of adult education organizations that advocated for the Digital Equity Act. We are thrilled to have this equity investment as a complement to the larger broadband infrastructure funding. The equity inside the Digital Equity Act is its complete focus on covered households and covered populations. NTIA's DEA planning template needs to make that focus crystal clear and define that the key role of an administering entity is to bring identified stakeholders to the planning process. In every state, there are public systems that represent providers and constituents that DEA is intended to serve. These systems can bring not only expertise in covered populations, but also examples of current digital equity initiatives that can be invested in and scaled through DEA. NTIA's guidance should mandate the inclusion of public systems serving covered populations through community anchor institutions in the core DEA planning leadership, including covered household or low income serving systems like TANF, SNAP ENT, and HUD, language barrier serving systems, including the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA Title II, adult education, which serves English language learners and people with foundational skill needs, and incarcerated individual serving systems, including state departments of corrections. Building digital skills is a vital aspect of digital equity. A landscape scan completed by the EdTech Center at World Education confirmed that access to the internet and devices is not sufficient for digital equity. The scan identified a common misunderstanding, a belief that digital skill development happens by purchasing software or a tool. The reality is that digital literacy and skill development works best with explicit instruction to help people use technology to accomplish their goals and is not tied to a specific tool. NTIA should guard against states buying solutions wherein DEA funds enrich companies selling products and services. A lasting digital equity solution will come from communities and the embedded systems that serve them. In terms of strategies, digital navigator programs have proven effective as they train staff and volunteers across community anchor institutions to provide just-in-time, individualized support for accessing devices, internet, and relevant digital literacy training with flexible options to participate. Finally, as for evaluation and accountability, state plans should define measurable objectives for digital skill gain, and these accountability measures need to be carefully crafted to drive intended practice. These measures should also be embedded in those public serving systems that are serving the covered populations in order to scale and sustain digital skill development. NTIA should facilitate a national working group of practitioners who have developed digital skill measures to help establish common ground. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Judy. Buddy, you're next. And then after Buddy, it's P.A. Tibbetts. And I'm going to put in one reassurance, Buddy, before you speak. And the reassurance is to let everybody know that the slides for this presentation will be available about a week from today on our website, along with a video of this presentation and a transcript. And so if you would like a copy of the slides, I'm afraid you'll have to wait a week, but they will be available on our website. Buddy, take it away. Tell us who you are.
Hi, this is Lauren Long. I'm currently with Buddy Robinson. We are representing Value Concepts Incorporated, BCI, located in Lawrenceville, Georgia. I'm a grant coordinator and project manager. So first of all, thank you for helping secure funding for fixed wireless broadband systems for rural, underserved, and unserved communities of America. In order to effectively take steps to diminish the digital divide, we need to take into consideration all of the resources we can utilize. According to Emily A. Vogels, a research associate focusing on internet and technology at Pew Research Center, with fewer options for online access at their disposal, Americans with lower incomes are relying more on smartphones. As of early 2021, 27% of adults living in households earning less than $30,000 a year are smartphone-only internet users, meaning they own a smartphone, but they do not have broadband. In addition, for example, in April 2020, 59% of parents with lower incomes who had children in schools that were remote due to the pandemic said their children would likely face at least one of 3 digital obstacles to their schooling, such as a lack of reliable internet at home, no computer at home, or needing to use a smartphone to complete schoolwork. The BEAD grant addresses the need for broadband internet access. However, it needs to address the need for cellular coverage as well. This means that while yes, providing broadband internet is crucial, in order to fully acknowledge the limiting factors of the digital divide, we need to take into consideration all of the technology devices that one should have access to, including cell phones. To elaborate, these same rural, unserved, and underserved communities have many telecommunications tower cellular dead zones. Due to these telecommunication dead zones, citizens cannot use their wireless devices to make 911 calls in case of an emergency. And also emergency first responders such as police departments, fire departments, and emergency management are unable to utilize telecommunication services in these dead zones. In addition to this, the digital divide does not only pertain to internet service in the home, but it also pertains to the use of cellular devices out of the home. There are a large number of individuals in rural and underserved communities that spend their days outside of the home. And having access to cellular coverage and data outside of the home would be a productive first step in addressing the digital divide in our underserved, unserved, and rural communities. Therefore, in designing fixed wireless infrastructure that is funded, the tower infrastructure for fixed wireless installations should be strategically designed to cover these dead zones for wireless device connectivity. With this strategy, we can kill 2 birds with 1 stone. We can provide fixed wireless to these communities, and we can provide cellular service for the dead zones, all with the infrastructure of a cell tower. These cell towers can accommodate.
Would you wrap it up? Then I want to remind everybody that you can also send your written comments to broadbandforall@ntia.gov. And I have a sense that we've got some really good written comments coming in after you guys are done with this. So please give me your last couple of comments.
All right, I'm almost done. Funding for this is imperative. These cell towers can accommodate fixed wireless internet service, cell coverage, and public safety radio connectivity. Funding for this is imperative for connectivity nationwide, and I strongly urge you to consider investing this funding to the construction installation of cell towers so that we can proactively put an end to the digital divide. And last but not least, in order to productively execute this plan, the states also need to release mapping of cellular coverage dead zones in underserved and rural communities so we can follow the FCC mapping guidelines.
Okay, I do encourage everybody to remember that you're welcome to send comments directly relevant to the questions that we have here to broadbandforall at ntia.gov. We do continue to welcome your feedback. We are definitely focusing on these questions, and we do want you to keep your comments to 1 to 2 minutes. So that was the speaker for PA Tibbs. Lauren, did you say your name was?
Yes, Lauren.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Paul Gee, and after Paul Gee, we have Shelly Wright. Paul?
My name is not Paul. My name is Patrick, and I was just
Well, I'm Paul. I'm Paul G right now. I can speak.
okay.
Hi,
Sure.
Paul.
Apologies. Patrick, we'll have you up next.
Okay, great. No worries. So listen, let me just comment to Lauren, because we really do have to have some sanity when we talk about this process of getting broadband to everyone. It is very important that we serve everyone, and it is very important that we serve them with high quality broadband. So when Lauren is saying that fixed wireless is a good strategy for doing that, she's not actually looking at the evidence that's already in the FCC's record on this very issue. There are 27 volumes of evidence, 11,000 pages, that will show everyone that if you did such a strategy of fixed wireless, you would kill much more than just two metaphorical birds with these wireless stones. You'd be killing many, many actual birds and insects and unfortunately people by believing that wireless broadband and wired broadband are, quote, functionally equivalent services, end quote, as stated in the 1996 Telecommunications Act. That is not true. The Telecommunications Act only is for telecommunications service. It has nothing to do with broadband or wireless broadband. Wireless broadband is completely unnecessary and hazardous, and it is not a good way for digital equity. What you want to do is actually go back and say, gee, in question 4, we have a fill in the blank ability list. You see, many abilities there, but you're missing a key term called accountability. One key best practice is to learn from our broadband history from the 1990s to the present, that's 30 years, and make the parties responsible for creating the digital divide fully accountable. No taxpayer-supported entity should be getting a pass for the fully documented sins that created the digital divide in the first place. That means that the money was misused and we did not get our contracted for 45 megabits up and 45 megabits down, that was in the contract, to go to everyone. They were supposed to replace our copper with that fiber for that purpose. You know how much money is available there? $500 billion. I appreciate going back and getting the $500 billion back from those companies. It dwarfs your $42 billion. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Now, do we have Patrick next or Shelly next?
We have Patrick Messack.
Patrick?
Hi, thank you. My name is Patrick Messick. I'm the project director for Oakland Undivided, a collective impact equity-based initiative attempting to bring broadband to our 36,000 unconnected households and the 94,000 residents without a device, internet, or both. I want to thank you for creating this opportunity to provide some feedback, and I'd like to just offer some insights briefly into number 1, the most effective digital inclusion strategies. We have found here that we are deemed a served area, despite tens of thousands of folks without broadband. This is going to keep Oakland and many urban areas across the country from accessing the lion's share of BEAD funding. And so DEA is probably our best opportunity to bring more connectivity to urban areas where the majority of the digital divide resides. I want to uplift 2 strategies that we deem as critical to our efforts. The first is what's commonly referred to as digital navigators. We call them broadband adoption hubs here in Oakland, but I don't know if anyone on this call has tried to navigate the application for the Affordable Connectivity Plan, but it is laborious to say the least. And our families are going to need a lot of support through trusted institutions to navigate that enrollment process. Our nonprofits and our community-based organizations, the trusted folks in our community that can help get families signed up for this long-term benefit, are taxed from providing so many critical services throughout the pandemic and desperately need funds if they're going to be responsible for helping to enroll folks in this benefit. So I hope that DEA specifically makes clear, the NTIA makes clear that broadband adoption centers are designated for this money. We also believe that many of our unconnected are currently residing in multiple dwelling units. Many of the folks who will not be able to apply because of their mixed citizenship status for the ACP reside in these buildings. And we believe that we need to create an accessible free apartment Wi-Fi. We hope that the NTI makes clear that bringing broadband to multiple dwelling units should be a priority and make clear that these are eligible uses of funds. Thanks for this opportunity to speak, and I look forward to continued collaboration.
Thank you very much. Carol, I have to ask you if you'll tell me who's next.
We have PA Tibbs coming up, and then after PA, we have Shelly Wright.
PA and Shelly, PA next, and then Shelly. And while you're speaking, I'm going to quickly get my on deck screen up again. PA?
Yes, good morning. Good afternoon, Ms. Perry. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. My name is Phillip A. Tibbs. I represent the firm of Broadband Bridge TIS Group JV. We are very interested in how number 3, the NTIA plans for the BEAD proposals and those the broadband equity and access development grants from a perspective of not only the states, but federal cabinet level agencies that may be able to be utilized in those deployments, and us as a mix of small business and actually cooperation with larger ISP corporations nationwide, and to look towards those particular opportunities. We're very interested in trying to see how the aspects of digital discrimination can be eliminated, and very much the digital literacy. One of the earlier persons had mentioned about the affordability access plan, and we have already investigated into that as a possibility of then seeing where the $30 internet reduction from the ISPs is actually there. It is, yes, it's complicated, but it has to be done. And also it's 1 to 2 billing cycles before it's even projected to even be equitable and available to actually the citizens that would apply for it. But if you don't have internet or the access to it, it's very difficult to go from there. So we encourage that this would be able to be done as soon as possible. And we as a corporation, in the earlier slides, we would be one of the persons applying for these. Thank you very much, Ms. Perry. I appreciate it. And you see that I've held myself to then 30 seconds. Well, okay, 120 seconds.
Thank you very much. And is it Shelly next? That was Phillip. So then Benny on deck?
Shelly is up.
Shelly?
Shelly, you are unmuted if you're able to speak.
I think you might be confusing me with Shelly. It's like, but my mic is still open, so I'm not Shelly. So
That's all right. Yeah, we have both mics open right now.
Shelly Wright?
Okay.
And you were Phillip Egan.
That was
Egan?
Phillip is up next after Shelly, and then we have Benny Lee. So we can, Shelly, let's give you 1 more minute. See if we can get you to unmute.
We can come back to you.
We can come back, please.
Phillip Egan, are you there?
Karen, I have now unmuted Benny Lee.
I'll
Benny
go ahead and
Lee.
speak. I'll go ahead and speak. Hi, my name is
Benny
Benny Lee.
Lee.
Yeah, can you hear me?
You're
Can you hear me?
always there.
Can you hear me?
Benny Lee, you're there. I hear you.
Okay, great. My name is Benny Lee. I head up the San Mateo County Public Wi-Fi program, and I'm speaking on local governments and non-subscription public Wi-Fi program. As you know, when the pandemic hit, the state of California had 160,000 student dropout, which was 2.6% of the population. We saw this happening in San Mateo County in the most underserved areas, where dropout rates during the first 2 months was between 5% to 10% of the student population. So rescuing the students was very critical. When we built out the public Wi-Fi program, and I'll just tell you, in the last 6 months, we saw 100,000 devices connecting. It enabled schools to rescue kids, including providing student counseling, reversing the trend. And it also enabled underserved families to leverage the public Wi-Fi to find jobs, work remotely, and do Zoom type health checkups, and many other functions. It also enabled underserved families who had no connectivity access to government services, such as food services, rental services, and unemployment, as many of the offices were closed during the pandemic. Now, I spoke in previous webinars before. Subscription services is what seems to be the focus, and we need to focus on non-subscription, which includes public Wi-Fi, where local governments can actually look at the most underserved areas, because this will help increase adoption through this model, through ubiquitous access through non-subscription. We've done it, we proved it, we have the numbers. Also, I mentioned that my prior role as a council member in the city of San Leandro, through public-private partnerships, through the subscription services, we worked with a builder, right, to provide strands, basically grant 10% of the strands so that we can cover public services. And I heard Oakland, I know that they did wonderful, 1,100 wireless access points, which gets over 200,000 connections a day. These are services that local governments do. And it's important for us to make sure that it's not just about subscription services, it's also about non-subscription services, which local governments can help bridge that gap for adoption of these technologies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Benny. I wanted to call on Tom Karst next, and then next Sakin Gupta. And please correct my pronunciation when you come up. Tom?
Yeah, thank you. I'm Tom Karst with Century Tech. We're a social impact organization focused on leveraging the intersections between broadband, technology, housing, and opportunity to meaningfully advance the lives of the historically and currently marginalized. I wanted to talk about questions 1 and 4 and kind of how they intersect today. With looking at how we should measure the objectives for this program, I think in addition to those traditional metrics, we should expand it to the broader opportunities that this connectivity could present. Broadband is more than just getting online. It's about health, it's about education, it's about employment, it's about future, it's about access to services. So if we intentionally start with those metrics and use those as a guideline to then look into our traditional availability, affordability, accessibility, we can better understand not just who's getting connected, but how lives are changing with all of this. And that feeds into kind of the best practices of making digital inclusion interventions powerful. One of the pieces we've heard already about is access to services. If we can link access to government and community services through these plans, we can digitize and deliver resident services that people may not be aware of or may not have access to or may struggle filling out the complexity of the forms. And bringing all of that together and then bringing it back to the measurements, we can really amplify the impact that these programs have on people's lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sachin? And then I think Shelly is ready after you.
Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you. Would you please correct me on my pronunciation?
Thank you, Karen, for giving me an opportunity to speak. My name is Sachin Gupta. I am with CenturyNet Fiber in Oklahoma. We are based out of Stillwater, Oklahoma. I would like to tackle question number 2 and question number 3 of your list. And then I also have a comment about your competitive grant program, as well as a comment about the act as a whole. States in their digital equity programs, they should prioritize low-income neighborhoods. They should prioritize small communities, like cities which have populations less than 20,000 and they have poverty level over 15%. If they prioritize these small communities and low-income neighborhood, they can be more equitable with their digital equity program. Further, and I would reiterate Patrick from Oakland's comment over here, if the states create broadband adoption hubs and broadband adoption spots within these small communities, it would really allow these small communities to take use of programs like ACP, which is a great program, but the sign-up process for that ACP program is extremely onerous. It is extremely difficult for ISPs such as us to sign up people, and it is difficult enough for people who want to sign up for ACP to go through that. So creation of a broadband adoption hub in these small communities would help a lot. For the competitive grant program, my comment is this. On your slide, you said that NTIA may approve additional eligible entities. And I would recommend that one of these eligible entities is minority-owned businesses. Most of the inequity lies with minorities, and minority-owned businesses are the ones that are providing services to the minorities. So they would be best placed to use these funds to hopefully get rid of some of these inequities. And then my final comment is about the act as a whole. On your slide, you said that 50% of the funds would be distributed as per the population of the state. What that means is that even though the act has equity in its name, it heavily favors equality rather than equity. In a state like Oklahoma, which has 47% of its population that is unserved, 1 in 4 children do not have access to internet to be able to engage in distance learning. We will always get less money than rich states like California or Texas, even though our needs are greater than their needs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think Shelly is ready to come back online, and I think we have, it's another name I'm going to have problems with, Antoine Wallace, and you're going to have to correct me on my pronunciation when you come online. So Shelly next, and then Antoine after that.
Thank you so much for letting me speak. My name is Shelly Wright, and I'm the Director of Canadian Educators for Safe Technology. We need quality, superior fiber optics to the premises, that's FTTP, in our communities, big or small. FTTP will provide the most effective digital inclusion and equity. Electromagnetic disabled people have been injured and displaced by indiscriminate, pervasive wireless signals in their communities from cell towers. I have worked with children and teachers in schools who are injured by wireless signals in schools. I also know of a growing number of people who are becoming sick around 24/7 wireless signals. They are experiencing what physicians call microwave sickness. We need funds allocated to support electromagnetic disabled people who need wired-only technology in public places so we can access essential services. Fiber optics to the premises to every home and business will provide superior, fast, more consistent, and energy efficient signals. Cell towers injure and displace electromagnetic disabled. For 2 decades, our accommodations and integration needs have been ignored, and options for housing, employment, and transportation have been severely restricted. We would like key players to share our concerns loudly, widely, and consistently to reach policymakers, urban developers, and everyone so they can create accessible public spaces which integrate the needs of electromagnetic disabled people so they can work and access essential services. Wired technology supports these disabled people. We need wired hospitals, wired workplaces, wired grocery stores, wired community centers, and wired communities. We need digital equity funds allocated appropriately for FTTP fiber to the premises to support electrosensitive disabled people in their communities and workplaces. Thank you so much for this opportunity, Karen, to speak.
Thank you. Antoine, would you help me with your name and tell me where you're from?
It's Antoine.
Oh, I was close.
Thanks. Great. It's Antoine Wallace, and I'm calling in part as the CEO of National Innovation Service, where we do both racial equity work and co-design with communities based on community participatory research. And I just want to insert to this conversation just to set to the questions of 1, 3, and 4, and moving us past best practices into efficacious practice for interventions. I think what we've been able to do in other places around supporting what we know about early childhood education and establishing benchmarks that are based on efficacious data are also available for us to think about bringing people online. And that leads me into metric frameworks as we think about much of this work seems to pit equity against global competitiveness and lacks the ability to really think about the capabilities of innovation in this space. And particularly when we think about the demographies or the demographics that were laid out earlier, I think there is a need to substantiate lived experience as subject matter expertise and the epistemologies there and the way in which knowledge is created and then informs these works. This is particularly, I think, important for the BEAD proposals as we think about disproportionate impacts and folks with lived experience. And it allows us to attend to some of the most structural gaps, and we haven't talked about the structural gaps in terms of who's online and who's not online, and deal with some of the subgroup disadvantages that are historical, gendered, raced, placed, and classed. And I think the more explicit that we are about those questions, the more animated the questions of equity might be in terms of being a substantial part of this portfolio. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to, we have Nancy Van Dover next, and then we have Robert Toporek next on deck. Nancy, are you available? Didn't give you much warning, I'm sorry. Do we have Nancy Van Dover?
Yes, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Oh, thank you very much. I am an EMS disabled person, and I represent at least the 6% of the population that are EMS disabled. It's a fast growing population. And because of the deployment of the wireless everywhere. And I'm part of a number of groups that represent the EMS disabled and also safe technology organizations in our country. I don't know of any other population who is more affected by the access to the internet and whether or not it is wired or wireless than the EMS disabled. And
will you help me and tell me what EMS disabled means?
EMS, yeah, and unfortunately, this is the case. Many people don't know what it is. It's electromagnetically sensitive.
Okay, thank you.
And we can be actually severely killed, injured and killed by wireless. I am actually 2 years now an EMS prisoner in my home. I cannot go outside of my home. And not only do I have ADA and Fair Housing Act rights that are being violated, but you know, I am like many other EMS disabled. We have no public access, even though we have a law. We have laws that give us that. We don't, because there are no accommodations for us. And I would like to see that this can be changed, at least in part, by this Infrastructure Act. And how this can be done, the only way it can be done is by fiber to the premises. If we're going to be able to have digital inclusion, if we're going to be able to have digital equity, and it's extremely important for the EMS disabled because many of us are just shut into our homes. And the only way that we can have education, the only way we can work, the only way we can get access to our government, the only medical I have is telemedicine. So having safe internet to my home is extremely important. And if I didn't own my home and was able to shield it, I would not have a place to live. There are millions of EMS refugees around the world being pushed out of their homes because of wireless radiation. And so that's why I say that the only safe way to actually give this internet is through fiber to the premises. And it's also future-proof. It's the fast way to do it. It's energy efficient. I have advocated for my Rural Electric Association to provide it, and we are successful. So I'm hoping that more municipalities and rural electric associations will be considering doing this.
Thank you. Thank you, Nancy.
Can I please continue a little bit more?
Well, you're at your 2 minutes, but yes, please wrap up your thoughts.
Some of the things that I would like to see the NTIA be able to provide for us is some guidelines for those who are receiving the grants, just like we have for wheelchairs, for us to be able to have access to have accommodations. The community anchor institutions need to be able to know how to be able to accommodate us, and so we need guidelines in there for each state. And for the NTIA to be able to provide guidelines for low dirty electricity on the optical network terminals for the fiber, so that it can be safe for everyone, but especially for the electromagnetically sensitive. And it's extremely important for fiber to the premises to be going to and within the community anchor institutions. At least we can have some of these places within our country that EMS disabled will be able to have hospitals and schools and libraries and such that we can begin to have public access for, and into the multifamily dwellings. Right now, we have no safe housing.
Thank you, Nancy.
So it's extremely important that we be that our accommodations be included in the planning for this grant program. Thank you very much.
I would like to call on Robert Toporek next, and Erin Hustings is on deck.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Is this Karen Perry by any chance?
It is Karen Perry.
Karen Perry, do you remember Robert Toporek?
Yes, kind of.
Were you in Philadelphia a number of years ago?
Yeah, do you do support for people with disabilities?
I support everybody that needs a computer.
Okay. Yes, I had a little bit of a Philadelphia bell going off in my head when I saw your name. This goes back a long time.
It was a long time ago, but I love you, dear.
Yep.
I'm glad.
So now you know I've been in this field for 17 years, and now you know how excited I am to see this Digital Equity Act. And it was so exciting to just listen to the presentation from Russ and Rafi and hear every piece of that legislation. Robert and I were back in Philadelphia like 16 or 17 years ago, thinking about digital inclusion and really on the ground floor of this work. And when these words were new.
So I'm going to be 75 soon, Karen. And I've now, without real funding or real staff, managed to distribute over 21,000 low-cost refurbished computers to families, schools, organizations, veterans, and anyone in need. And we've helped so many people, it's not even funny. And we've helped people from all around our region, throughout the state, across the country, and around the world. So I put my phone number and information in the chat. If you reach out to me later, we can talk about it some more. And there's a small network of refurbishers, people that are doing that. And it's not really a nationally concerted effort to provide refurbished computers to people that can't afford to buy new ones. And we struggle every day, every week to find more people to donate our computers. I'm a one-man band, so there's just so much that I can do. But at one time, we were able to get computers from the state and from the national government. And I don't know that that is in existence anymore. And I would love to know how we can, my goal is to raise $1 million, fully fund and fully staff what we're doing. We have information on everyone that's ever gotten a computer. Everyone that gets a computer from us writes a letter and tells us something about their life. We have some of the most amazing letters you've ever read, from people that are homeless, people that are disabled, people that are seniors, you name it. And the difference between us and as best I can tell, and other refurbishers are that we include a suite of learning software that a guy in Hong Kong put together. And there's a reading module, a math module, and a music module. And then we put links to Khan Academy. I don't know if everybody's ever heard of Fact Monster, but Fact Monster is an amazing free program that anybody can have access to on their computer. And then we put a link to Power Library, PA Power Library, and anybody can go to that link and have access to the entire resources of the Pennsylvania Library. And it doesn't matter where you live, as long as you have internet access, you can do that. So I'm interested in being in the game of expanding digital equity. And I would love to know how we can take this and go forward with it. And maybe by this time next year, give out another 21,000 computers. We're actually set up now that we could replicate our program anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world.
Thank you, Robert. My memory is now jogging in, and this Robert's Place was the first place I ever saw anybody doing refurbished computers, and he taught me about it. So that was a really long time ago. I would like to call on Erin Hustings next, and Robin Johnson is on deck. Thank you, Robert, for joining in.
Hi, this is Erin Hustings. I'm with Bitwise Industries. We're a social enterprise based in Fresno, California. We train underserved people from underestimated communities for careers in the tech industry, and we enlist those folks in providing tech consulting services and effectively transferring digital knowledge to institutions and individuals in their communities. I wanted to just make a couple of comments about effective interventions and best practices. And I want to co-sign on the comments by the Oakland Undivided representative about the power of digital navigators, and add that we have found it's particularly important to employ not just trusted voices in the form of institutions and nonprofits, but people who come from underserved communities to be the navigators, to speak to their peers, and to open up those pathways into further resources, and really to help people feel comfortable with reaching out, taking advantage of what's there, and becoming more digitally literate. I also wanted to encourage the inclusion of private industry in planning processes, which doesn't seem to have, the private companies weren't among the many stakeholders that were mentioned as necessary inclusions in this process, but not just as providers of broadband services, but as potential employers whose activities can bring and create wealth in underserved communities. Many of our big tech corporations have invested heavily in training in digital literacy, in the sense of training folks to hoping that they can uncover more potential people to fill the many jobs that are open right now in these fields from among these underserved communities and areas of folks who haven't had the opportunity to gain skills through traditional pathways. These companies' investments need to align with the investments that the Infrastructure Act is making, and the companies need to see the folks who will receive, who will be on the audience end of our digital equity and literacy efforts as not just potential users of their services, but as their employees, their workforce, their core. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Robin. I've got Mark Bayless next, and I want to tell you who's coming up after Mark. It's Lazan Grays, then Eve B, and then Lilibus. Thank you. There's not too many Lilibus, I think. And we only have about 15 more minutes. So I'm going to ask you all to keep your comments to under 2 minutes. We probably can maybe get, that's probably about all the speakers we can get in. So just keep your comments tight so we can wrap it all up.
Karen, I believe that we have Robin Johnson.
Oh, did I skip Robin?
Yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to jump over Robin.
No, no problem.
Robin, didn't mean to skip you. Robin Johnson first, then Mark. Excuse me.
That's okay. Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
All right, great. My name is Robin Johnson. I'm with Communication Workers of America, CWA. Just a couple things, brief things. First, I'd like to thank Shelly in regards to the fiber to the premise. Doing between fiber and wireless, fiber is always, to me, the best way to go. I was using wireless. The problem is that wireless slows down when too many people are on it. With fiber, that is basically for you. It's for your household, your business. This is something that you don't freeze on. That's the key thing. You want something that's reliable for everybody, especially for those who are homebound. Fiber to the premise is something, especially for those who are homebound as well. Also, another thing is that I do believe that when it comes to the Wi-Fi, the Wi-Fi is okay for the libraries, but you have to look at the cybersecurity in regard to the Wi-Fi. They have to have something in place for that, because with Wi-Fi, anybody can link onto that with a hotspot. So we have to be careful when we do the when we do the Wi-Fi, because you have to understand that there are people out here not looking to use it the right way. Using fiber basically is just for that person. You know what I'm saying? They don't have to worry about somebody kicking it on their fiber. But Wi-Fi, that is a problem. Also, we have to make sure that we have somebody who's making sure that this money is being spent the right way. These underserved areas, they need to have this fiber to the premise coming to them to where they have the access to the internet. They don't have to worry about the slowness of it, because they might have more than one person in the household with them working from home. Now, it has to be a fact that everybody has to be included in this broadband bill, because as we know, the pandemic opened up a lot of eyes. So we have to also take in the fact that labor has to be included in the bill, because the fact of the matter is that we don't want someone coming from another state building something. They have no idea what they're building. They only looking at the blueprint. They don't live here. They don't understand. We have to make sure that it's being.
Shelly, you got to wrap her up.
Okay, I'm getting ready to wrap up right now. We have to make sure that our state will be able to grow employees here, have employment opportunities here for when it comes to building.
Robin.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Mark? Mark Bayless? Robin wrapped it up so quick, I scared you.
Mark, you're able
unmute. Here we go. Can you hear me now?
There you are.
Okay, sorry. All right. I have my watch going, so I'll make sure I don't go over 2 minutes. Hi, I'm Mark Bayless. I'm from the FCC Technology Advisory Council, and I'm working with the state of Virginia on their broadband planning. I've got one question. One question and a comment.
We can't answer questions, but.
Oh, okay. Well, all right. Can't answer questions. Well, the question was simple. Okay. Well, if you can't answer questions, I'll go on to stage 2. But it was about being able to build backhaul into Indian tribes that are recognized federally, if those backhauls, as they pass through other communities, can be accessed from it if those communities do not meet what would be the digital inclusion.
So send the question into broadband for all at ntia.gov.
All right, will do. All right, now as the NTIA person said, yes, fiber is always the best method. because as broadband speeds continue to increase, fiber has an unlimited basic potential for being able to increase in capacity. Just need to change the technology at the ends. But as far as wireless goes, now one of the other callers had said something about the FCC had said that wireless wasn't safe. There's no such thing on the FCC on that at all. That's a complete incorrect statement. In fact, on the IP transition to replace the copper lines and the phone lines, that's the 5G is going to be the replacement on the transition, because we only have 2% of the households that are using copper lines now, and we're losing $70 billion per year in supporting those systems. So 5G and 6G, which the commissioner just announced, and reestablishing of my committee that we are going to lead the world in 6G. Intelligent highway systems, networks, autonomous car systems cannot work correctly without 5 and 6G. Fiber to the home is a good idea, but it's going to be impossible to get rid of wireless communications, as a lot of people I've heard state on here. But all right, that's it. I wrapped up under 2 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Mark. I'd like to ask for Lazon Grays next, and note that Eve B is on deck after that. Do we still have you, Lazon? Lazon Grays, then Eve B, and then Lilbeth.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Excellent.
You're on screen.
Lazone Grays in Topeka, Kansas. I'm with IBSA Incorporated. Organization is a proud affiliate of the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. Thank you. My question or comment is, there's a lot of money out there from like the capital projects funds, and then of course these funds here. I'm wondering if there's any way of maybe producing something so they can sit side by side, because a lot of organizations, some organizations in this space doing that work, they really can't see, you know, how all of this fits together in things. So there's so much money out there that sort of like a kid in a candy store, you're just sort of looking at it because you just don't have that snapshot on what's the difference between this and here. And it seems like the states have to do the same thing with their equity plans and things. So I think that there's going to be some agencies lost out there. And if there's any way of doing some type of a snapshot or side by side, maybe that will help people really understand what's the difference between these and possibly the deadlines and things of that nature there.
So noted.
Thank you.
What a good problem. Eve B, and then after Eve is Lilibeth. And then Mary Bauer is going to be our final speaker before I make some wrap-up comments.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay, thank you. My name is Eva Bortnick, and I am one of the people that Nancy mentioned. I was an electoral refugee and still am. I have way too much radiation in my home. I lived in the forest for 20 years and in my car because of cell towers sprouting up all over the country. I could not find a place to live. I promised myself if I ever got out, I would be an advocate for people in my situation, and that's what I'm doing right now. The previous speaker said that it's impossible to live without wireless. That's not true. We did that for all of our history until about 100 years ago. And it's much safer for everybody. It's in our Constitution to make the general welfare for ourselves and our posterity. And so you are also committed to doing that by serving for our government. So I just wanted to say I would like to see you also make a pamphlet educating people on how to hardwire their homes, their equipment. People don't even know these days that they can get a telephone line from their local telephone company hardwired. They don't know that they can get their internet hardwired through their local telephone company. That's all really important to go into a pamphlet that you would disseminate through through this program, and also to please to not have grant monies available to people who are doing wireless, because we do not have a place to live. We're the only homeless people that have no options of places to live. People are shielding themselves in their homes, and still in much pain, and people are homeless, living in their cars without any place to live. No place is safe. So please keep places available without wireless, and please, through this grant money, we do not need any wireless. It's killing birds, it's killing nature. We need to keep a future planet for our children. So thank you.
Thank you. And Lilibeth.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Lily Beth Genghis. I'm the Chief Tech Community Officer of the Caper Center, which is a private foundation focused on increasing pathways into tech for communities of color. We sit at the intersection of racial justice and tech. And as somebody who, myself, as an immigrant who has benefited from the upward economic opportunities that a job and a tech job can provide, for myself, I've seen how important it is, and it wouldn't have been possible if I didn't have access to the internet. It wouldn't have been possible if I didn't have access to a computer, and it wouldn't have been possible if I didn't have access to education at the different points for me. And I'm here to advocate specifically for Oakland Undivided, specifically Oakland, specifically the East Oakland area, West Oakland areas, where we have a high density of low-income communities of color who live in apartments and they don't have access to any other way of connectivity. So we would like to see the NTIA making it clear that some of these funds can be used towards low-income apartments, specifically to help provide broadband adoption, being able to help fund some of the nonprofit organizations that know and are trusted by these specific communities, so that way they're able to get grants. Right now, we've seen with some of the FCC funding available to provide families that are low income to get connected to the internet, they have to go through these programs, but a lot of the times through existing providers are for profit, but a lot of the times the burden is on the local CBOs, and they are nonprofits doing the work for profit. So I find it wrong that where a lot of the hard labor is being put on the back of the CBOs and nonprofit organizations trying to tackle and support communities of color, specifically Black, Latinx, and Indigenous. So I speak from my own personal experience of the need that I've seen, specifically also for families are of mixed status, immigrant status. So being able to provide them connectivity through homes, through apartment buildings, through different areas, specifically extending the middle mile to all throughout the area that's more dense. In East Oakland would be super valuable, and it's an equity issue. So I just wanted to state that. And then also making sure that areas like Oakland are not overlooked. Sometimes we put rural versus urban, but it's not an or, it's an and. And so we should be looking at how to making sure that we're connecting communities that are low income, providing them fast enough service. So this is where the fiber really comes in. And it is now a digital access is a civil right. So I want to make sure that we are stating that. And as a previous caller that mentioned earlier, creating broadband infrastructure are jobs, and these are great paying jobs, and these are jobs that are going to take us into the future. So we'll love to see more of the funding and grants be allocated to organizations that are also providing that type of training and adoption across. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Mary Bauer, do you think you can give us kind of a 1-minute wrap up before I do my wrap up? And Carol, can you set up my slides?
Yeah, absolutely. Mary, if you'd like to speak, there you go.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm Mary Bauer. I'm the Technical Director of Virginians for Safe Technology, a consumer advocacy and educational group for responsible technology. I want to address the comment that was made by Mark Bayless, because he is working on the plan in Virginia. The broadband plan in Virginia to say that the FCC's guidelines are being challenged in the DC Court of Appeals, and that the guidelines are being revisited for a safety issue. So that may have been a correct statement as of August 13th, 2021, but at this point, the jury's still out. My comments regard the EMS community, and wireless broadband being promoted by the Infrastructure Act creates a different kind of digital divide for the EMS population. They may have access to wireless platforms, which is the Act's overall goal, but this population, which is about 10 to 15% of the general population, won't be able to use it. This also is true for school children that are getting injured at school because they're forced to use these remote virtual learning platforms. Their bodies are much smaller. They absorb the RFR, radio frequency radiation, a lot more than an adult body. So these are just two parts of the vulnerable population that are being excluded from getting accommodation. They pay a high price with their health if they don't get.
Can you put up my slides so we can do that wrap up? I need the wrap up slides. And Mary, I'm sorry to cut you off, but
okay,
we are already at times, and I'm afraid we've heard that message. Right. So I'm gonna.
I just want to say one last thing, if I could.
Please, please do. Yeah, please give us your wrap up message.
The smart choice is that there are places where wired should be absolutely put in, and there are absolutely other places where wireless should be put in. And a smart person, maybe like Mark Bayless, might be able to do that in the state of Virginia. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary, for giving us your comments and for making them brief. I really appreciate that. And thanks everybody for giving us your comments and for providing all of your insights to NTIA to support us in our planning. This is a transition point for us. We've taken a lot of input, and we will be continuing to look through this input as well as all the written input we've gotten from you and others. We continue to accept input, and we welcome you to send your feedback to broadbandforall@ntia.gov. But we welcome you to our upcoming webinars, which will be technical assistance webinars as we develop our notice of funding opportunities. The technical assistance webinars will be in advance of the availabilities of the notice of funding opportunities. So there'll be pre-NOFO webinars, sort of kind of a coming soon NOFO webinars, and they'll start on March 9th. But you can register for them at our events page. So they'll be March 9th, and then at upcoming dates all the way through May. Next slide. And we really want to thank you for joining today's session, and also for supporting all of the efforts in your local community to help build back better in America, and for all the work that you're doing in your communities for building a broadband adoption and building equity everywhere. Thank you very much for joining us today.